Again, would like to start with a request, with the hope that those talks will be helpful and give us some tools to guide us and take responsibility for our future. Those talks are done under the general assumption that the main process taking place, as I've said in previous session, is a process of spiritual conscious evolution. And that process is going from separation to unity. That's the main direction. And the main paradigms, the main point of views that we held thus far were primarily divisive point of view. They were based on division. And the main shift that we are facing is a shift towards a unifying worldview, and most of those talks will be focused on that movement, along that line. I want to start this evening with maybe the prime division that we often talk about, and that's the division between good and evil. That's the first division. It was talking in the book of Genesis. We'll eat from the book of knowledge, and then we know how to separate the good from the evil. We most often think about this as two sides of the same thing. If there is good, there must be evil. In order to recognize the good, we must also recognize the evil. And in the last few thousand years, there was a lot of emphasis of trying to understand and identify evil, and by identifying evil we can maybe know what is good, right? Then we'll know what's the other side. I want to present a different version, a different point of view on the concept of good and the concept of evil, and I want to separate the two, to look at both of them as standing independent one of each other. And I want to start from the concept of good, to look at the idea of good as standing by its own, and how we approach it. And in order to do that, I want to start with what I call the Buddhist paradox. The main story that is being told about Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, is that he was a prince, he walked through the country, he recognized the suffering of the people, the sickness, the old age, and he set on course to find a way out of suffering. And then he sat under the tree for so many years. The story tells that he was sitting for 5 years, and then he got enlightened. And he got a vision, and he got to a place where he didn't experience suffering anymore. And from that point, he came to teach other people the path. And the way it's been told, and what the teaching, the Buddhist teaching goes, is that the main cause of suffering is our desire for things to be other than what they are. And that desire for things to be different is the main cause for suffering. And from then on, he touched many different ways of practices, and the whole Buddhist movement came to be, and hundreds of millions of people are following the Buddhist path. Now here's the paradox. If the Buddha was in a place where he didn't want anything to be different, most likely he would come and he would say, look, the grass is green, the sky is blue, the water is wet, the winter is cold, and everything is just the way they should be. And that would represent the place that he supposedly was at, that he accepted everything as they are and didn't care for anything to be different. And of course, if that's what he would have done, there wouldn't be no Buddhist movement. Nobody would try to make something different. But as the Buddha came and brought his teachings, millions of people now actually looking for things to be different, which by the teaching is the cause of suffering. So the very act of the Buddha to come and tell us that there is other reality caused people to expect things to be different, which is, by the teaching, what causes suffering. So we found out that once supposedly the Buddha reached his state, he didn't accept things as they are, but he came back and told people what he found and set them on the path to reach the same place as he was. And here we are at the same process of wanting things to be different. How come all those teachers come and tell us about some different state of consciousness, different reality that we do not experience? If he would come and tell us, yeah, the sky is blue, the grass is green, this is our experience, naturally we would accept it. But he comes and tells a story about a state of consciousness, a state of reality that we do not experience. We experience what is called the Maya, the real world with all the suffering and death and disease and everything. We do not experience that state of consciousness that he was talking about. How come we take their words and starting to do all those practices, change all our behavior to try to achieve something which is not our experience? How come that happens? And that happens, of course, over and over and over throughout centuries. So it turns out that this particular perception that there is a possibility for better place than we are at the moment, and we can do things, we can act to make that happen, is a fundamental aspect of human consciousness. That idea that things can somehow be improved, that they can be better than what they are, and we have a capacity, we somehow have an ability to effect that, to do that, is a fundamental aspect of who we are, of being conscious. And again, we were talking in the last session of a specific trait of humans, which is different from other creatures on the planet. We don't know that other planets behave that way, but we do. We have this ability to project into the future, to perceive reality, which is different than what we experience at the moment, and believe that we can take steps to make that reality happen. And we'll do that, of course, only when we assume that that reality that we are heading towards will be superior and somehow better than what we experience right now. So because we have that inherent conscious aspect of our consciousness to do that, when those teachers and many others along different lines come and presents ideas or reality that we think will be better than when we are, we accept that idea, we test it sometimes, we check it, we look at it, but if we adopt that idea, we change our behavior in order to try to accomplish that. And in fact, that idea that things can be different and better than what they are at the moment, and we can act to make those changes, is fundamental to who we are. As a matter of fact, that fundamental principle is the base for all our philosophies. If you take this out of philosophy, it becomes empty. All religions are actually based on that assumption. All spiritual paths, all of them, and all spiritual practices are based on that assumption that we have a capacity to change things for the better. The whole scientific field, for all what it is actually based on that assumption. If you take that assumption out of science, of all its different branches, including engineering and economics and sociology, all of the branches of science are based on this particular assumption. The idea of morality, of moral, that we can choose how to behave, is based on this assumption. The idea of justice, the idea of the rule of law, that we can actually make a law for ourselves and follow it as a group, as a society, is based on that assumption. And the last thing I'll mention here is that assumption is what makes life meaningful. Without it, we lose. We can experience pleasure, we can experience pain, but we can't apply meaning to life. The idea that we can perceive different future better than what it is and take steps to make it happen is really the fundamental aspect of what makes life meaningful. And in fact, that I'll put on the side because it's not the whole. Even the fields of arts and literature, to a large extent, occupy that idea. You take that, then you may get visual aesthetics, but much of the meanings implemented into literature, even if it's a fiction, and even if just aesthetic and how we evaluate and see the progress in art, still depends on this idea. So we are actually looking at the concept of good. We're looking at the future which is better, which is totally dissociated from the concept of evil. We didn't say a word about bad or evil or wrong in this whole session. And taking into consideration how fundamental that concept is also worth noting how little, relatively, emphasis we had put of identifying both as individual and as a group what we believe to be good, where we want to go, what we want to be, what kind of future we want to chart for ourselves. There was significantly less emphasis put into checking what is good than trying to identify bad and evil, for that matter. And I'll talk about the concept of evil separately. So considering how fundamental this principle is, then, and how we actually use it both as individuals and as a group, much more attention, I believe, should be placed in identifying what we believe is good and what is our capacity to make that good happen. Because otherwise what happens is we just take many things that people just throw at us, whether it be for commercial use or for any other things, to be good just because somebody threw them at us. Because we almost constantly, from choosing what we wear when we go out to work in the morning, which pet we're going to take to work, what we're going to plant in the garden, and hundreds of thousands of other decisions we make every day, from small to large one, are all based on that idea that we identify a better choice, choose it, and take it. And that is resting on, again, an aspect of our consciousness that can make a connection from past, present, and future. As we've said before, our experience is always only of the present. Our ability to connect, to see the line of the past, to learn from the past and project into the future is part of our consciousness. And one more thing that I left out, and I'll just bring it back, are all education system, again, not a small system. All the education system rests on the assumption that we can predict to the future and take steps to make the future better than what it is. Without that assumption, there's no point of educating anybody. We are just responding, reacting. So again, that's another system, not small one, as you probably understand, that is resting on that assumption. So I'll end tonight's session with that. And in our future sessions, we'll look at different ideas, both of good, and we'll take the whole notion of evil as separate. But it's important to note that there's no need for there to be an evil, wrong, or bad in order for us to conceive good as an alternate to what we experience now.